Okay, well, back to Curious Christianity. And unfortunately, I feel like the church has just been going through scandal after scandal. I know it probably feels that way because of the internet, because we have such a much broader scope today than we ever have before. And it's no longer only about your own personal little church. But the thing that makes this a little bit interesting to me is that I have had scandals happen in my churches, in the churches that I attended. I've watched pastors go down to infidelity and watched as they've covered up their indiscretions, as other problems have arisen, and they didn't leave ministry the first day, you know, things came out. They didn't like, there were lots of problems. And so it's weighed on my heart a little bit as I've seen so many scandals going about now. And there's almost a Christian gossip chain that has been eating it up. And I feel like some of them have even been enjoying it. They've been just living in the drama. And I remember one of the last videos that somebody put out of, exposing one of the latest false teachers, prophets. And I literally just kind of hurt over it. It just kind of made me sad, sad to see it, and there's just so many of these different ones. And I think the other thing that most of us don't really take into consideration as much is the name of Christ. Whenever these false teachers come out, most of these guys prior to that moment, they wore the name of Jesus Christ. They were there to represent Christ. And now that's what the world sees. And I think that's something that other Christians are not thinking about so much when this happens. It shouldn't be a celebratory moment and that, like, oh, maybe you didn't like that guy's preaching already, and now finally it's come out that he's a fraud. Okay. But a lot of the world, they believed and said, he's a Christian. And so now when it comes out, Jesus' name is brought down. And when you look at the Ten Commandments and it says, hey, do not bear your God's name in vain, that's what it's talking about. Don't wear the name of God and then live like the world. Don't wear the name of God and then live opposed to the Ten Commandments. And I think that's been really tough. And so I think of like some of these names, and I feel like there have been issues that have been brought up on a variety of different sides because not everybody is completely in agreement as to how some of these situations should be dealt with. They're not in agreement about what should be done, and sometimes almost even what happened. But one of the things that I think has been fascinating to me as I look at, yeah, Steve Lawson and Todd White and Ravi Zacharias, is that here are three men with completely different theological bents. Their teachings were very, very different in many ways. And on the internet and everywhere else, people call people heretics all the time. You're a false teacher. You're a false prophet. Oh, you don't believe in this. You don't believe in that. You're a false teacher. Oh, you don't believe in the gifts of the Spirit. You're a false teacher. Oh, you do believe in the gifts of the Spirit. You're a false teacher. And when I look at Jesus, and when he calls out false teachers in the New Testament, he didn't point to their theology so much. He pointed to their fruit. He said, oh yeah, by your fruits you will know them. And it's like, yeah, that's what he's talking about, the fruit of their theology. But then he specifically mentions their moral character. Their moral character. And it stands out to me because when I look at Matthew chapter 7, that's exactly what he's talking about, right? And it's right there that he specifically is addressing, hey, look, this is how you tell who are the false teachers and who are the true ones. That's the verses like right before it. That's the context for Matthew 7. Matthew 7 is specifically addressing this issue of knowing them by their fruits. And then it mentions this idea of, it's like, oh, yeah, you'll see them. Some will be performing miracles, casting out demons, prophesying. And then in the end, Jesus says, away from me, I never knew you. And most people stop right there. But the next line is, for you workers of iniquity, you workers of lawlessness, you like basically you sinners. Away from me, I never knew you. You guys lived in sin. And it's the whole point that it's like, it doesn't matter how majestic, how powerful, how many incredible things you did. What did your life actually reflect? Did you actually reflect Christ? Or on the inside, were you actually dead on the inside and living like the world? And so I think that that's a major issue that too many people have mistaken just seeing the miracles and the Spirit of God instead of the actual character of God. Now, there's a lot of problems on both sides, and I want to get to some of these things because I've been listening to some of the discourse over these many scandals, and there's too many. I haven't even caught up with all of them, and I'm not going to. I'm not going to bother to even listen to all of the reports. And the first thing that actually I want to address is that as a Christian, as part of a church and the church corporately, it's not my responsibility to be the watchdog for every single church around the world. My responsibility is to my church, the one that I go to, the one that I have say in, the one that I have leaders and elders, and that we all get to interact. But over so many of these other churches, I feel like the internet Christians feel like they should be able to have a say into any other church. And this has caused a lot of division in some ways. And I'll go ahead and bring up one of the most interesting situations that I've just never seen happen before. It's the Michael Brown scandal. So the Michael Brown scandal has been one that's been going on. I'm not going to get into all the details of the case, but I'm going to skip like practically to the end. Michael Brown did some stuff many years ago, and then there was a whole report about it. So it came out enough to where they decided like, okay, there needs to be an investigation, right? And so I don't know which organization, but they decided to hire an investigative organization and do a whole report and find out like, okay, what happened and what was he guilty of and what was he not guilty of, what's true and what's not true. And so the report came out and basically said, yes, we think that he's guilty of sexually abusive misconduct. He's abusive of spiritual abuse and all this stuff. Okay. But then the elders, so then he has an elder board. So they get that report, and the elder board is the ones who are to decide what's to actually happen to Michael Brown. And they disagreed with the language that was used by the report. And they said, hey, we don't think that it qualifies as this. We don't like the language that they used, and we disagree with it. And we find Michael Brown okay to return to ministry. And lots of the Christian community just erupted in fury and very upset by this decision of the elder board. But they're the elder board. And so to me, it's the awkward situation of trying to tell another church how to run their own church or another organization, because that's the part that I'm a little bit confused about is that, oh, it's an elder board. Is it an elder board for a church? Again, I'm not going to bother with all of the details, but to me, the point is they were the ones who got to make the decision. They were the ones who got to make the decision. Does Michael Brown return to ministry or does he step down? And they said he goes back to ministry. They did not believe or agree that the decisions and the things that were said by the investigative report merited his expulsion. You can agree or disagree with that. That's, to me, partially irrelevant. The point is this: since they're the ones who made that decision, I know lots and lots of people who were all barking at Michael Brown, and I understand. But the elders, the ones who were in charge, the ones who had the say, the ones who could have put an end and a stop to all of this, they're the ones who said, hey, go back to ministry. So if you want to put the blame on someone, it would be the elder board. They're the ones responsible. They're the ones who had the decision to make, and that's the decision that they made. And so for the rest of us, it's strange where you have a whole bunch of people standing on the outside telling another organization how to do their ministry. And so for that part, to me, there is a degree to which it's like, okay, yeah, what else can we do? Like, I mean, I think, sure, you can disagree, you can post and make comments, but at the end of the day, yeah, it's their decision. And they are going to be the ones who are held responsible for that decision. In some ways, yeah, Michael Brown, he has, at this point, he has been like, well, I'll put it this way. I totally understand the two big responses that came from the Christian community as a result of this. One, half the Christian community is reviling. Lots and lots of the Christian community is very, very upset. Now, the other side, they were literally celebrating. As pictures been going around, there was confetti and welcoming Michael Brown back to ministry. He has been vindicated. Everyone is super excited. If you believe that he's completely innocent and not guilty of this stuff, I don't think you can believe he's 100% innocent, but I understand the celebrating. You know, if you don't have anything else, like, I understand the celebrating. And for the rest of the community, I understand them being upset as well. But I'm not really sure that for all of the Christians that weren't actively involved in those situations, who don't actively know the victims, who don't actively know Michael Brown, who are not actively a part of fire ministry, you don't have a say. Like, we don't get to control what other ministries get to do. And I do think it's a very strange thing when you're trying to pressure people into different decisions when we're not in any of those authoritative positions. And if you are in one of those authoritative positions, then it's your prerogative. You get to make those decisions, right? The elder board who was on that committee, they're the ones responsible. So they get to make those decisions. And so I think that's one really weird situation, but the leadership, they're the ones who get to decide. Now, one of the issues that really concerns me about some of these things, and it's not to say that we shouldn't remember exactly what's happened, but here is, to me, another situation that is really bizarre, and it's the idea of a statute of limitations. And I'm not saying that there should be or there shouldn't be a statute of limitations, but it's this: lots of these issues, for example, yeah, Michael Brown's case, Robert Morris, they're from events that took place over 20 years ago. Should there be a statute of limitations for Christians? Like, what is the deal? And this I find very, very difficult and very, very troubling, because there really isn't a lot in the Bible that addresses this question. Like, if somebody did something 20, 25 years ago, and then it comes out now, what's the procedure? And so I don't think that there's really a perfect answer for this. However, I do think that one of the main things that does make this very different is the case that most of the time, these issues were not addressed fully at the time when they did happen. And so, if they weren't addressed when they occurred, then it does set a little bit of precedent. It's like, okay, well, maybe there is something to talk about. And a lot of other people had mentioned that had some of these guys come forward, come forward at the time of their events, they may have undergone some church discipline, but they also may have been fine long term, and that everything would have been worked out had these things been addressed in full in the past. And I think that's a very valid point. So what it makes here is that the issue then for many of these ones, because some people could say, look, it was something that happened 20 years ago, and this guy has been living faithfully, righteously, serving God, pursuing God, and doing the Lord's work for all of these years. But when you actually look at most of these times, have they really been? Because in all of the situations that I've seen, most of it has been covered up. It wasn't addressed in the past, number one, because people actually didn't know the full story. The details were covered up, and progressively more and more and more came out over time. Or in some cases, things were squelched because the idea was so unbelievable. Ravi Zacharias is a great example of this. I'll tell you, when the stuff about Ravi came out, it hurt. It was definitely a huge blow and crazy. And some people to this day don't even believe it. And I understand why. Like, his ministry had done so much, he had helped so many people personally with his messages. But many also don't know there was an atheist website called Ravi Watch, and they had been pointing out for years deceptive practices. They had been pointing out lots and lots of issues about Ravi for a long time. And of course, since they were an atheist, they were kind of kicked aside. Nobody wanted to believe them or listen to them. And there were other whistleblowers who had come out about Ravi years while he was alive of these issues. And so the issue was not like, oh, well, this had only happened like once way in the past. One, it was being covered up. He was actively covering things up. And so most of these situations in which, oh, well, somebody committed something in the past, and guess what? And they covered it up, and they continue to cover it up, because a lot like most lies, when you make a lie, in order to keep that lie buried, you have to give another lie and another one, another one, and another one, and another one, and another one. It just goes on and on and on. And so this is a huge issue. And so for those that are saying like, well, but this guy has been in ministry very successfully and clean and good for all this time, I think not. You have to reevaluate, because to me, the bigger issue for some of them, it's not only what took place. So for example, I hate to bring up the Michael Brown thing again, but it was just the latest one that I had like reviewed it all. Like, his indiscretions, yes, were grievous, but they weren't like to the same degree as Ravi Zacharias or some of these other guys. The issue to me was not entirely like, if you wanted to talk about like, oh, well, yeah, if he had perpetually covered this event up, it's the lying that makes it so bad. Not just the indiscretion. And that's one of the parts that blows me away. That's one of the parts that blows me away, because I don't even feel like it's being brought up as part of these conversations. as there was another scandal with, the G3 conference and Josh, and they mentioned these things. They caught him having a bunch of fake accounts and making these, bullying other pastors basically. And yeah, they're just like, oh well, that's the thing, right? He made these anonymous accounts. He did these bad things. It's like, yeah, okay, but when they confronted him, he lied about it. When they pushed him further, he still lied about it. Only once they showed him irrefutable proof did he say, okay, I'm willing to take responsibility for my actions. It's the lying to me that just is a massive red flag. What about getting fully caught says, I'm willing to take responsibility for my actions? Like in Christianity, especially, if you're fully caught, like there isn't anywhere else to go. Like you can't really just stand there and say like, oh, I'm not going to take any responsibility. So, and I felt like the same thing was actually very similar with Steve Lawson. It was the fact that he didn't like just as soon as he began to get caught, say like, okay, guys, you got me. Let me confess and push on about everything. Some of these situations, people really, really had to be pushed. And I think that that's something else that should be taken into consideration, when they're considering like, oh, like, how should we deal with this person and what were all of their, sins? Like, why is lying and deceiving and covering up their indiscretions omitted as part of the thing that they're guilty of? Because it's the other part that actually hurts a significant amount of people. When you look at all of these situations, there's tons and tons of victims. There's tons of victims. There's the ones that were actually involved. But when you listen to any of the stories, the other victims are the tons of people that confronted that person in some cases and then were cast aside. I'll give you one of the ones that's not going to be popular here because it's my own story, right? A few of my pastors have gone down to adultery, but one of them I was a little bit more involved with, in the sense that like I was there for some of the meetings. My dad was really there for some of the meetings, and my dad spoke to the pastor as well. And the pastor, he admitted to having an inappropriate relationship, but not adultery. But other men confronted him to his face in public and said, no, you cheated. You committed adultery. And he denied it. And almost all those men who confronted him directly, who disagreed and pushed back, well, they were kicked out or had to leave. And it was their names that were dragged through the mud. It was their names who were pushed around and talked about negatively for, calling out the pastor. When in reality, they told the truth. And it was the pastor who lied. It was the pastor who was deceptive. And so in lots of these cases, there are people and have been other people who have spoken out. But instead, nope, everyone turned on them. Because how could you speak against the man of God? How could you speak against such a great preacher? How could you speak against a man that has such incredible theology? And so there are way more victims than merely the people that were directly involved. Because in many cases, it's been the honest whistleblower who has gotten run over. Okay, that's like a whole bunch there, but all right. One of the other aspects I want to speak on is I really do not like the language that's being used today regarding lots of these occasions. Let me give you an example. Some of them I've seen, it has said, oh, he is being outed for sexual misconduct. Here's my problem. I do not know what that means. Sexual misconduct to me could be anything from like, oh, he like touched her fingers once or hand once to really, really abusive, degenerate type stuff. That's terrible. But to me, the problem with like lots of these things is like, where's the detail? Like when you're accusing somebody, these languages I don't know. I feel like there has to be some more clarity because to me, without clarity, there can't be transparency. I don't know how else to say it. Without clarity, you can't have transparency. And so maybe there's an official dictionary somewhere, but like, one of these cases, it's sexually abusive misconduct. Okay, like adding the term abusive didn't really help me any more than before. Sexual misconduct, sexually abusive misconduct. How can sexual misconduct not be abusive? I don't know. Maybe it's a difference in power dynamics, people might say. That's a whole other conversation that I might not get around to today. But like even, yeah, when they want to talk about SA, which would be sexual assault, like it's really unclear to me today what people mean when they say that. How is this referenced? And like, I feel like these things need to be much more clear, especially if a pastor leaves and they just put the terms out there and they say that and then that's it. And it's like, if I'm going to that church and you're going to be making drastic changes, for example, taking the pastor out, and it's public, like everybody already knows, then yeah, I would appreciate some clarity as to what on earth happened. And not just like, hold on, let's hand wave this away. Oh, well, he did some bad stuff. Okay, like what bad stuff? Like that's pretty confusing. So I'm really concerned over some of these things. And the reason that it concerns me is that when I look at the Bible, we do have some lines for, I don't know, misconduct and all those things. And you do have like some particular type of sins there. And at the same time, though, almost all these guys you could list. Yeah. Oh, does it disqualify them for ministry? Well, let's read like a ministry passage for a moment. Well, actually, I'm going to read a little bit different one maybe than usual. But so yeah, like when you look at this one, okay, Revelation 21:8. But as for the cowardly, the faithless, the detestable, as for murderers, the sexually immoral, sorcerers, idolaters, and all liars, their portion will be the lake that burns with fire and sulfur. Okay, so he just said all liars. He's listing the liars along with all of these other really grievous sins. He takes the truth. You're saying the truth is a really, really, really big deal here. These are the people that practice these issues. And so every one of these cases, there isn't a single scandal case that I've heard of, and I'm not sure even almost how there could be, that doesn't involve lying. Like there's just not a case that does not involve lying. And so these guys lie to cover up lots of these things. And I'm not really sure why that isn't part of the equation taken into account. Okay, now I want to address a couple other things regarding just leadership. What do we expect from our leaders? And one of the great things that people bring up is he should be above reproach. There's another term that's actually used in the Bible quite a bit that I actually really like it. Like it. Blameless. Someone who is blameless. That's the idea that nobody can point a finger at you and say like, hey, look, we know this. This is a huge, big, open scandal. And that's part of the problem. I certainly don't think most of these guys can be considered blameless. And like when I hear about the Josh Boyce case, right? This didn't involve sexual immorality, it didn't involve drug abuse or alcohol. It had to do with his content and character and the fact that he posted a bunch of mean things and slandered other pastors, which to me is a big deal. But the part that I would be more worried about is his lying character. He seemed to be very deceptive in all of this practice. And that's a pretty egregious thing. So anyway, all right. Um, Now, I do think it's really interesting when you look at Todd White and you look at Stephen Lawson and Ravi, because they all come from these different backgrounds. And there was a really interesting case with Mike Bickle that involves this idea of false prophet. Because all the times when I hear somebody talk about who's a false prophet, who's a false teacher, it's like, well, did they teach something falsely? Like that's pretty much it. And somebody asks, like, oh, well, so and so's a false prophet. It's like, how do you know? Well, they prophesied falsely. Okay, look, we can all see that's a pretty easy indicator, right? Like that's pretty easy to tell. Not even the charismatics completely disagree with that. Like when you're like, oh well, so and so's a false prophet. Like, how do you know? It's like, well, he prophesied this and it was completely false. Prophesied this and it's completely false. Like, okay, yeah, that's a pretty good measuring stick. Now I know some people are so into that they overlook even the most obvious of false prophecies. But there's a verse that I don't ever hear brought up, and that's Deuteronomy 18. I think so. Let's see. Oh, no, 13. Deuteronomy 18 is like really popular one, but Deuteronomy 13 is one that I had not quoted, and it makes a lot of sense out of one of these situations that was really weird. All right. So he says, if a prophet or dreamer of dreams rises, right? So here's somebody who is receiving some sort of, signs or something, and they give you a sign or a wonder, and the sign or wonder that he tells you comes to pass, right? So I want you to catch this, right? He's saying, like, here's somebody who is performing signs or miracles, and it comes true. Like it happens. They're like, oh, it's going to snow tomorrow, even though all the weathermen predict, oh, it's like 80 degrees tomorrow, hot and sunny. And then tomorrow it snows. All right. And then God says, if he says, let us go after other gods, which you have not known, and let us serve them, you shall not listen to the words of that prophet or the dreamer of dreams. For the Lord your God is testing you to know whether you love the Lord your God with all your heart and all your soul. All right, like stop there for a moment. God is testing you. He's testing your heart to see if will you follow him? Will you follow him? Even though the miracle, the prophecy, the sign occurred and it was legitimate, it was genuine. And I know for the cessationists out there, they will just kind of say, like, okay, well, anything that happens, any prophecy today is false prophecy. All right, I don't know. If you guys just believe that, then this message just isn't for you. But for anybody who believes God still speaks, can still perform miracles, why would God perform a miracle? Why would he give me this prophetic word when it confirmed everything in my heart? And God says here, it sounds like what? Who's behind the sign or miracle? God is allowing it to happen. He's having this happen because he's kind of like, don't you know? Don't you know I wasn't behind that? Why would you think I was behind that? Why would you think that I would lead you into false worship? Why would you think that I would have you worship other gods? Why would you think that there would be something else that I would put ahead of myself? And yeah, he still says, right? Oh, but that prophet or that dreamer shall be put to death because he has taught rebellion against the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt. And I really thought about this because there was one of these victims and they were in, one of these avenues and they were praying to God and asking like, hey, Lord, like, is this real? Lord, behind are you behind what's going on here? Are you behind what these guys are teaching? And then they actually put out a fleece, in a sense. They said, Lord, if you are behind this, then have them bring up this particular thing. And then that person prophesied and gave them that exact thing. And now, of course, them looking back on the entire situation, finding out that it's like, oh my gosh, like, because it confirmed to them that this was what God had for them and that they should continue to pursue this. But now looking back, that person was an abuser and horrible and just completely the worst. And they're just like, why did that happen? And to me, it seems more apparent is like the reason that happened was because they had actually made an idol out of that leader. They had made an idol out of that leader where God should have been their focus. And I do believe in prophecy. I do believe in the gifts of the Spirit. I do believe that somebody can hear from the Lord, that the Lord can speak, that he can do some miraculous things. But this was a situation in which the person had a sign confirmed for them, and it wasn't what they were supposed to hold on to. Because while something miraculous happened, they put the leader in the place of God. They listened to the leader all the time. They were focused on, oh, the amazing ministry, the amazing thing. And yet, it wasn't of God. God wasn't in it. He wasn't in that abuse. He wasn't in the manipulation or the control. And this is something that people get taken advantage of. They do. People go and look for the face of God, and they're earnestly desiring and seeking to be close to God. But sometimes their hearts are far ahead of their minds. They haven't actually checked out and seen that, you know what, there are major red flags here. There are major signs that this person is not doing and following what the Lord has actually said, what the Lord has actually written in his own word. So just because somebody gives you a prophecy and it comes to pass doesn't mean that it's legitimate. I'll tell you another story that I heard a long time ago. It was about a guy who wanted to disprove the fortune tellers, right? He wanted to disprove the fortune tellers and the soothsayers and stuff like that. And he thought that stuff is silly, it's stupid, it's not real. It's just a bunch of people tricking people and making stuff up, and it like doesn't work at all, right? And so he went down to one and got his fortune told. And what happened? It came to pass. Like what they predicted and said came to pass. And so he went back again. Oh, and guess what? Happens again. Oh my gosh. And so for a little while, like, oh my gosh, like everything that person said was coming true. Everything that person said was coming true. And he was really starting to think and wonder. And man, he became anxious and fearful. And this was going on for a while. And then one day he just woke up and he was like, oh my gosh, what have I been doing? The Bible strictly prohibits. Do not go after spiritists and soothsayers. Do not listen to them. Do not listen to mediums. Do not listen to all those people. And he just said, Lord, I've sinned. I repent. Let me turn away from it. And is from that day forward, all of a sudden, none of the prophecies came true anymore. Everything fell flat. And so we have to be discerning that you cannot only discern a prophecy by if it comes true or not. You have to be more discerning than that. Sometimes something someone says to you will be true and it will come to pass. but it's still not coming from the Spirit of the Lord. It's still not righteous. It's still not holy. And you have to watch out and be truly discerning and allow others into your life to test the words, to discern what's true, to search the scriptures and make sure what is true and assuring. All right. All right. So when we have all of these leaders from all different backgrounds, and I think that that's been one of the things that's been, I don't know, discouraging, encouraging, is that there have been scandals in all these departments. But I will say, I do think that certain avenues have handled some of these situations a lot better than others. But one of the things I want to speak to is probably one of the most difficult. But I also think in some ways it's one of the most important. Like I said, many of these situations, they have come out years and years and years after the case. So this is for you. It's to the victims. I don't know any other way to say this than please be brave. If you've been taken advantage of, the next person needs you to speak up. The next person needs you to speak up. I know trauma is terrible, and I have helped counsel some people through this. But one of the things that most of the victims I've ever seen, and I've watched like lots of these interviews, and this one of the things that they all said was all of them, lots of them, they all thought like, I'm the only one. I'm the only one. It's only me. And in many ways, the victim almost wants to sacrifice themselves on the altar. There was like, I'm going to take it so that nobody else has to deal with it. I'm going to suffer, and I'm not going to deal with every thought that runs in your head. But if there is a thought that runs through your head, I want it to be this: speak out, because you're not going to be the only one. If you don't speak up, there's going to be somebody else, and somebody else, and somebody else. And when you look at most of these situations, they're not isolated incidents. Most of the time, it's one after the other. And several of these cases, it's women or people or victims in the double digits. And so when the event happens, be bold. Pray to the Lord, ask for help, ask for strength, and speak out. And if you're one of the ones that are there to encourage other people and to be there, you got to speak out too. Nobody likes being in those situations. Situations are the worst. They're the worst. And I'll even say like, I remember one time that there was somebody I knew, and a few of us, you know, heard and found out what happened to them, and told them and recommended to them, and to go ahead, please speak out, do it. And to their credit, they did. They did. And it tore the family apart, destroyed lots of things. But I'll tell you something else, is that it also, I believe, helped set that person free, because everything came out. The truth came out, and they don't have to live with the same degree of shame and guilt that nobody knows what happened. Nobody knows what's going on behind closed doors. And unfortunately, in lots and lots of these situations, everyone's just they're living with the situation that nobody knows about. They're living with the shame and the guilt of everything that's happening. And it's just so necessary. And when the Me Too movement came out, lots of women were all called brave for calling out such and such a person and calling out such and such a person. But a lot of those cases were also very similar. They were similar in the sense that they were about allegations that took place 10, 20 years ago. Where was the brave woman that could have put a stop and could have put an end to so many of those situations had they only spoken up earlier? And yes, I know that sometimes you'll speak up and nobody will listen to you. Everyone will push you to the side. Everyone will say they don't know what they're talking about. They're a liar. You might get slandered. But you can live with a clean conscience, knowing that you tried, knowing that you did your best. And you can try and save others. Be that person that they eliminate, future victims. And so that's one of my biggest encouragements for victims, for people involved, is to be bold. And some of them, I know it's not fun, but they end up reliving it later on in the future. So I really hope that there are changes in church cultures. Lots of people have been talking about, oh, well, we should have a different church culture and all that. I'll let their pastors and their churches decide how to deal with their own church cultures, because I'm not responsible for all of those. But I do pray that God will continue to change those. And everyone's different. But the other problem that I've seen is that everyone talks about, oh, well, the rules. Like, you just got to have what? The Billy Graham rules. When you look at a lot of these situations, and even some of the pastors that I know, they had the Billy Graham rule. They had the Billy Graham rule. They had the most strict rules you can imagine. The rules weren't the problem. The people were the problem because they broke the rules. They had the rules in place. Oh, yeah, I'll never be alone with a woman. I'll never do this, even if it's in a car ride or elevator, like only with my wife. And then they don't follow it. And the rest of the staff don't say anything. And people looking on the outside don't say anything. And so the biggest errors are human. They're not about the rules that you set up. It's about following them. It's about being filled with the Spirit and following God, following Jesus. And if you don't do that, then all of the rules in the world, they're not going to help you. And so it's with that my heart just breaks for the church and for all the churches. And I certainly hope that more and more people will just learn to be proactive. I like as one person put it. You've got sheep, and then we've got the sheep's and wolves in sheep's clothing. And then somebody else once said, yeah, but in lots of places today, we got a sheepdog, and the sheepdog protects the sheep. And for all of the guys out there, that's who you should be. They talk about alphas, betas, and sigmas today. And if you don't know, the alpha dog is supposed to be the leader of the pack. The betas are kind of the followers. And the sigmas are kind of a new thing today, but they're the ones that just kind of go on their own. They just kind of do what they want to do. They follow their own lead. If you're a man, you should aspire to be an alpha, because an alpha is there to provide for the pack. They're there to lead the pack. And yeah, they're there to protect the pack. And so you want to be a leader that protects the pack. You want to guard and protect everybody else. Because unfortunately, there is something really sad about sheep. They are stupid. They are stupid creatures. They'll follow anything. Now, oddly enough, I've actually seen a bunch of sheep, and when we used to drive by them, my uncle used to joke, "Is like, oh, there's a sheeposaurus," and you'd be like, "What the heck is a sheeposaurus?" So, in the pastures that I had seen, they'd have a bunch of sheep, and then they would have a llama, right? And it looks like a sheep, just with a really tall head, so it stands out amongst all of the other sheep. And it's like, why would they have a llama? Because the problem is that when the coyotes or the animals come in to eat a sheep, the sheep will just stay there and get eaten one by one by one. But the llama is smart enough when he sees the predator, he runs. And as soon as he starts running, all the sheep just start running too. They have no idea why, but they're like, he's running, I'm running. And so you want to be a leader in those regards and, allow the other sheep to see like what's going on and to be followers. So anyway, um, yeah, I really am hoping for the best for the church, for individual churches. And I'm really also just hoping for, yeah, people to be bold enough to speak out, to focus on the truth in love and care and compassion. And my last thing is for the other leaders in leadership teams, because some churches have fallen so in love with people's gifts that they've put charisma over character, and they've missed out on seeing that Christ always puts character over charisma. The people that Christ is looking for to use, the people that he wants leading his people, they were often very unassuming because God saw what was on the inside of that person instead of what was on the outside. And that's where we need to focus. We need to focus on making the insides right so the outsides work well.